Now, the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute is concerned that spending will have to be made from already tightened budgets across the board. It says these cuts will wreak havoc on society's most vulnerable members, including children, women, the elderly and those with disabilities. According to the institution, this approach hasn't worked in the past and won't work in the future if the bulk of the country's population is left behind. For more on this, I'm joined by the think tank's research manager, Nqobile Zulu. Thank you very much, Mr. Zulu, for your time here on eNCA. Now, of course, there were already budgets that were cut in some ministers' portfolios, and now there's reduced budget. Those have been the concerns for many people we've spoken to on eNCA. Are you among those?
Thank you. Thank you. We are among those people who are concerned about the budget cuts. But interestingly enough, if I may point out something, the minister alluded to much more spending with regards to the police, but also the army. The question then becomes, what are we afraid of? If we're spending more money, the way he said he was going to, is not cutting on policing, but is increasing financing for policing and the army. We're not in a war situation, so how can we be increasing money for defense when we should be looking at the poverty, the bottom line, and the high unemployment that is currently affecting the majority of our people? So hence our argument to say, we're focusing on the wrong thing specifically, and to focus on policing and the army is not ideal in a situation where, if we're looking at the July 7 riots, in as much as the minister can claim that was politics and all of that people were being misled. The truth of the matter is the majority of those people were hungry. The majority of those people who looted and all of that, I mean, there were pictures that we saw from social media and all of that, where even the army had to go to townships or even to informal settlement areas, where they were going to people's houses, people's places of habitation, and taking out meal, sugar, cooking oil, and claiming, so we need those receipts. So if we look at that on that basis on its own, it says people were hungry. So what are we saying?
You know, when I look at what the minister said in terms of the army and the police, I think because we were on the ground as journalists, we saw how, overpowered the police were, for instance, and the army had to be brought out. A lot of people lost businesses due to how long those riots became. Could the minister have been coming from that point?
Granted, the minister could have been coming from that point. But for me and for a whole host of other CSOs, as we look at that, it says this can be an indicative of a state that has lost touch with its populace, that has lost touch with these people. He alluded to that when he spoke of the social contract having been lost, that we need to go back. So if we don't have trust for our own communities, if we don't have trust in our own communities, look at, when you turn that around, look at even after those riots, people themselves gathered themselves, and some people defended the malls where they lived in, right, to protect them against so-called looters and all of that. So if there is a willingness by people to come together and defend what they think they own, even though we know that most of those businesses are privately owned, but if they defend what they think they own, surely the state has an obligation to support livelihoods. Surely the state has an obligation to support decency of living. I'll give you an example. There was another social media picture that came out of a young man, 10 or 11, it's a boy, 10 or 11, who was caught. What did that young man take? Nothing but underwear. For himself. What does that tell you?
So they also
if we reduce our people to this level where they can only think of that. So I think there's a misnomer. There's a place where the state is not hearing the community. And the people have spoken loud.
So he also referred to the increased debt levels that government needed to continue to service. And I think a lot of South Africans become very upset when finance ministers say this, because we wouldn't have to take loans had it not been for some of the corruption that we've seen in South Africa. The reason why we lose so much money is because it goes into the hands of the people that shouldn't be having it.
Yeah. It's interesting that you refer to that, because the argument would be we're servicing so much debt, so we need to keep servicing that debt in order not to fall behind. But some of that debt has nothing to do with the local populace. I'll go, because you've taken me to this direction, I'll go, for example, to the issue of SAA. I know some of my friends will be upset with me for saying this, but how many people can afford to fly SAA? So should we be spending money in such a black hole that's not servicing the majority of our people? You talk of ESCOM, you talk of all the other SOE enterprises. So there is maybe a misdirection. Yes, corruption has had a big effect, and that is for the state to sort out. But also, if we're looking at the issues of the high unemployment figures, the latest figures point to 44.4% of unemployment. And there are people who have never had a job in their lives, who are 35. And now at 35, some of the government priorities says, we're not prioritizing people 35 and above. So what are we saying? These are the people that are left in the middle. These are the people that are stranded, that are a liminal existence. So a basic income grant will help to bring dignity to people's livelihoods. And the misnomer that money is going to be spent on alcohol or is going to create a dependence is not fair and is not honest, because studies that have been done in various countries have proven that once people have that kind of money, then they use it to enable themselves. They use it to start other small businesses, like what we have seen with the SROD grant, the 350. How many people have applied for that? We're talking about 9.5 million people that have applied after it was opened up. There is need. There is massive need. And if we're not addressing that, we're sitting on a powder keg.
I'm running out of time, Mr. Zulu, but just very quickly, with the budget cuts and this social relief grant that you're referring to, were you concerned when the minister said that he cannot say whether it would be extended further than March 2022?
Just to correct that, this Dr. Zulu, by the way, but I'll take it. The minister played a very clever political balancing act where he did not commit himself to an extension of those grants, but did not say whether they are closing off. There have been rumors of a family grant that's going to be substituted for the SROD, but not even going towards the BIT. And we as civil society and others, we've complained about that the family grant is going to worsen the situation, particularly for women and gender-based violence. So the fact that the minister is not committing and says, no, this is not an issue of treasury, it's an issue that is done by government in particular, is playing a very clever tightrope game where it's politics, where he's not upsetting any constituents. You can come back to us through the society and say, no, but I didn't say we're stopping this. Neither did I commit to us. You can go back to business and say, no, I didn't say we are committing more money into this. So what are we saying? Nothing in particular.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zulu. Thank you very much for your time there. He is Think Tank's manager for research, Dr. Nqobile Zulu.